This is Learn from Others, where we interview a cross-section of successful individuals so you can learn from their experiences, achievements, and even their mistakes. We ask 4 questions that will educate and inspire. Greg Stanley will be your guide as we join our guest on a journey from adolescent daydreaming to success in today's world. Join us on this adventure as we learn from others together.
Well, welcome to Learn from Others, where we help others succeed by sharing success. I'm very excited to introduce our special guest, Michael Keleher. Michael, thank you for taking us on your career journey.
Glad to help.
Well, before we find out what you're doing today, let's start at the very beginning. And could you please tell us, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Greg, have you ever watched the old cartoon Johnny Quest?
Absolutely.
Okay, I wanted to be Ray Spannon when I grew up.
Wow, one of those Johnny Quest episodes gave me nightmares. It was the one where there was like a creature from the Black Lagoon came up on the boat, and I had nightmares after that. But that was a great show.
Yeah, Dragon, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that one. Yeah. I thought that he was a cool guy, and he had a good job, and I worked and built and stair-stepped, and looking back on it, I had some Ray Spannon.
That's awesome.
In my life and career. So
what age was that you were watching Johnny Quest?
Oh, I was there. It was on prime time in 1964, 66. At night, we'd turn the lights off and watch that, my brother and I.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, what was your first job as a little kid or as a teenager?
Growing up in the Midwest, you had to take care of mowing lawns and raking leaves and shoveling snow, and then I eventually got to a paper route as well.
Okay, that seems to be a fairly common one. Good old paper routes that don't really exist anymore. So what was your first real job, one in which you received a paycheck, got a W-2? Was that the paper route, or was there another job that was more of a quote-unquote real job?
In high school, I worked at a Chevrolet garage in our town, and I would go in after school and do janitor work. I'd take out the trash and clean and sweep the floors, and then they worked you into a little more where you start, washing cars and doing oil changes and things like that. And I did that in high school, and when I graduated, I also did it in junior college. It helped support me pay my way through junior college.
Oh, that's great. Well, tell us what you're doing today, and I realize you are recently retired, but tell us your last full-time job, and if you would, kind of walk us through the different roles and responsibilities that got you to that position.
Sure. I thought about this question when we were talking, and I wanted to add in about how I was successful and got there. It was a stair-step project, working, through jobs and education, always stepping up to something better. And along the way, one of my professors said, you could be an attorney if you wanted to. I thought I was going to be a policeman, and I'd never thought of it. And eventually, I worked hard at it, and I became an attorney, and I was an assistant state's attorney, prosecutor, but I still wanted to be a federal agent. I still wanted to be Ray Spannon. And so I invested in that and worked at that, and it took a couple of years, but I was hired by NCIS as a United States Special Agent for the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and then for 30 years, I was a federal agent rocketing all across America and in some foreign countries doing investigations, and I did undercover work and narcotics work and homicides and cold case homicides and anti-terrorism and of course, bodyguarding. That's what Ray Spannon did. I never did get the red shirt, but...
Do you have the white hair, is my question.
I have some graying hair, which I like to call platinum at this point.
Well, I know our listeners are very familiar with the TV show NCIS, and I would not be a great interviewer if I did not ask you to comment on that show and maybe some of the real-life experiences or situations you went through, or, I don't know, just your comments on how that relates to real world, what you saw day in and day out as an NCIS agent.
Sure, that's a great series of questions. It was a wonderful adventure. The jurisdiction that NCIS has is they cover all the Navy and Marine Corps, all their people and all their property worldwide. It's a whole slice of Americana, and if anything affects that entity, then NCIS has jurisdiction. So we have agents around the world. We have agents on aircraft carriers. We have agents in Afghanistan and Iraq right now, and Africa. Everything you can imagine in the movies, we do it day to day. somebody is working on it. Pirates, we had a whole issue with pirates for a while, and my particular track was I was very much into criminal investigations, and so I worked narcotics and homicides as my main features, but also had a ton of sex assault and child abuse. I worked on some multi-million-dollar arsons, and then eventually made it up into supervisor ranks. So I was Gibbs for many years. For about half my career, I was a supervisor and then a regional supervisor, and I did a stint at headquarters where I was the division chief in charge of all death investigations worldwide. So we'd have between 300 and 500 deaths a year that were investigated. So it was a huge career with a ton of travel, and you got to meet so many people. It was really a fabulous career, and I always put my heart and soul into it. It seemed so important. And we were affecting people's lives, and I would tell my young guys, I said, if someone's dead, it doesn't get any more real than that.
Right.
The dead people aren't worried anymore, but everyone around them and their friends and family, they're all concerned. I mean, even if it was just a heart attack, we got to know.
Right.
We got to find out what's going on. Imagine 30 years like that, and because we were a smaller agency, there's about 1,000 agents worldwide. You might work in 3 or 4 different areas all on the same day.
Wow. Okay.
You might go to a drug deal, and you might go to a child abuse interview, and you might go to a dead body, or a shooting, or it's just huge variety of things for a federal agent.
Did all of the cases involve either Navy personnel or Navy jurisdiction?
Yeah, it had to have a connection to the Navy or Marine Corps. And you know that the Marine Corps is actually part of the Navy Department.
I did not.
But they like to refer to themselves as the men's department.
Not only were you Gibbs, but sounds like you were Gibbs' boss, relating back to the TV show, right?
Yeah, eventually I got higher up in the ranks and into the headquarters and regional levels, but I never completely got out of the field. I always kept my hands in or fingers in, or was willing to volunteer to come out in the middle of the night and work on something.
Now, can you share with us a particular challenge you faced in that role, you overcame in some way that you could share with our listeners?
There were a ton of challenges because you're dealing with human beings. People lie. When you come into contact with law enforcement, people lie. And we were there to do the right thing. We thought that we were the good guys and doing the right things for the right reasons. And yet people would hide things and cover up because they thought it looked funny, or we would think something different. And that was very challenging. And I have one example that's got to have to edit a bit, where we had a death case. It was complicated. It was like a TV show. It was just like an NCIS TV show case where someone shot themselves and also had a jump rope tied around their neck, and they didn't die of the gunshot wound. That actually, when they fell down, the jump rope strangled them to death. They held them about 3 inches above the ground.
Oh my goodness.
Very unique situation. And then I remember talking to the family of the deceased, and is there anything like this in your family of suicide or self-inflicted wounds or even just ideations? Oh, no. Well, come to find out, in this woman's family, 2 of her brothers had killed themselves, and 2 of her sisters had been hospitalized for attempted suicide. And then on her husband's side of the family, his first cousins were the victims of the largest mass murder in that state's history.
Oh my goodness!
So when I asked, "Do you have any history in your family?" and they said no, I'm pretty sure it was a yes.
Right. Yeah, it makes you wonder why they would hold that back, if it would help the investigation.
They're worried about how it looks or how it appears, and that's very frustrating as an investigator, because you're trying to do the right thing, and it makes you have to do it the hard way and the long way to get back to the truth.
And now, what was your last role before you retired?
I was Assistant Special Agent in charge of a region that runs from the northeast corner of the United States out to Minneapolis and as far south as Indiana. Across that swath, we had about a dozen offices, and I was an assistant agent in charge. I had supervisors in each of those offices that reported up to me, and I also was oversight of a criminal program. We also have a special agent that would oversee the fraud program, and another one doing counterintelligence. So it's a rather large territory, and I did that. And then the last 2 years, I was always a cold case homicide investigator throughout my whole career. And the last 2 years, I had a case that I worked on right alongside my supervisor duties. And the last year of it, I actually was undercover with a serial killer for about a year. Every couple of weeks, I would meet up with him and work against this serial killer. Not your average kind of work.
Well, can you speak to how technology has advanced so much that has been a great assistance to closing cold case files, such as DNA years ago? And is there anything recently that you feel like has been a huge advancement in technology as it relates to the cold case files?
DNA has just been enormous. When it first came on the scene, we started cleaning up stuff, and then it kind of dulled out. They got all the easy ones. Well, now DNA has evolved down to, we were using touch DNA was the next big evolution, where if you, Greg, touched your desk in front of you, you would leave up to 100 skin cells, just a casual touch. With touch DNA, if we had less than 10 skin cells, we could get a DNA profile out of that.
And that's because they can, multiply the DNA to get a large enough sample size to test? Okay.
Yeah. That became even bigger because when DNA was first around, it needed a large sample. Now we're down to just minute samples. And then a couple of years ago, they actually find it even further. They can split it down to half of the chromosomes, to just the Y chromosomes on a sample. Yeah, so we start taking these old cases off the shelf and taking the evidence off the shelves and sending them into the lab. A really good case we had out of California was 2 sailors were murdered down near the Tijuana border, and they were robbed. We kind of knew who did it, but couldn't get, the evidence proof. We took the victim's pants and sent it into the lab, and they swabbed inside the back pocket where these guys had dipped in there and took their wallet out, and they found enough skin cells in there to make a DNA profile and match, and we eventually then got 2 guys convicted of murder.
Wow, so the guy putting his wallet in his back pocket, that left enough DNA or enough evidence to get a DNA profile from?
That was touch DNA. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is. It's stunning. Back when I started 30 years ago with cold case, if they had a cigarette, they could find a saliva sample in that cigarette butt. That was big stuff, and that was for 20 or 30 years. That was as good as they could get. And if you were a secretor or a non-secretor of an enzyme, it could show up. But now, they could rocket all the way out to, the odds of this DNA sample being 1 in a billion, exceeding or multiple billions, exceeding the population of the planet. It's just amazing.
The classic movie scene or TV scene is the investigator sitting in a car outside waiting for someone to throw that cigarette butt into a trash can. Have you done that?
Oh, yeah.
Or waiting for them to spit on the ground or leave a soda can in the trash can.
Mm-hmm. I once took a customer service survey to a guy we suspected of murder and had him fill it out and lick the envelope to seal it up. We do things like that. We get to have imagination and bring that to investigations. It's not like the street policeman where you're just dealing with, what's happening right now. And we had the ability to go long distance and dream stuff up and do that. A little more like in the movies where they could do some audacious things or bring undercovers to it. The local police normally just don't have the time or assets to do that.
Well, is there anything in the NCIS TV show, knowing how the whole operation works, that just really bugs you? You're yelling at your TV, we never did that, or we wouldn't do that. That's not our job. Is there anything that pops to mind?
When they start talking about, hey, hack into, satellite links and feeds and hack into databases or banking records and that kind of stuff, that just leaves me cold.
I'm sorry.
The other question on the back side of that is people ask, is it like the real thing? Is it like, the TV show like real life? And I can tell you that like most jobs, when you see on that TV show all that constant pick on each other, and the playing of jokes and pranks, and that's real.
Right.
That's real. When the original producers were setting up to do the show, NCIS agreed to cooperate with them, and they brought some other writers and people on to look at some of our cases, and then they hung out with some of our people. I think they picked up on that. That's real life, and they still have technical coordinators at each of the shows that are retired NCIS guys, and they'll come to them a couple times per episode and say, well, how would you do this? And then they'll tell them the NCIS way, or they'll show them how to roll fingerprints correctly and that kind of thing. And then the producers will say, well, we got to make a TV show.
Oh, that's really cool. It's great to know that they go through those efforts to try to keep at least a large portion of it as accurate as possible. I know one of my pet peeves on the competing TV show, CSI, I believe is what it's called. You have the forensic experts interviewing the witnesses and going to houses and doing the detective work. It just wasn't feasible.
Sure. And that whole CSI phenomenon, are you familiar with that in the
a little
court
bit
system?
Yep.
Yeah. Juries want to see that level of technology. Like I've seen it on TV and I understand it, and why didn't you use that in this case? And it's hard for, police officers and prosecutors to explain that process does exist, but is really, really expensive, and we just weren't going to break that kind of money out for this sort of case, and juries don't want to hear that.
Yeah, or that actually does not exist. That's that's Star Wars technology. It doesn't exist. It made for a good episode or whatever. Well, cool. Well, before we move on to our next question, let's take a moment to hear from our sponsors. Do you enjoy your job and find it fulfilling? Or do you spend more time wondering what if instead of what's next? If so, contact Career Spa. Career Spa has extensive programs and curriculum and understands the challenges faced by individuals in transition. They can teach these success practices to be mastered for an effective job search. Answer that what if question by contacting Career Spa and asking their experts, what's next? Contact Career Spa at careerspa.net. Talent acquisition is key to building a successful organization. Talent Connections is a professional services firm that specializes in recruiting, including executive search, contract recruiting, talent acquisition consulting, and recruitment process outsourcing. Whether you are an individual or a Fortune 100 company, Talent Connections can connect you with success. Contact them at talentconnections.net. Well, welcome back. We just learned what you want to be when you grew up and what you actually do today. So if you could do it all over again, would you do anything different?
I might skip law school. It was a personal journey for me, and it was really hard, and it consumed me for 3 years, and it's very expensive. I started as a prosecutor and then was hired with as a federal agent, and I never went back to being an attorney. I didn't need to be an attorney to be hired for the position. All you needed was a bachelor's degree minimum. And if I had to do it all over again, part of me says, you know what, that was a lot of work and effort to go through law school. And then the other part of me is like, I remember thinking, like, when I finished, no one can ever take that away from me. It was a hard challenge, and I always had it in my hip pocket. I could always go back and be an attorney, but it didn't excite me.
Right. So that might go more to really understand what you want to be when you grow up, which I think is everyone. That's a really tough thing to answer when you're making that kind of commitment.
It is.
So
absolutely. I'm still wondering if I could be a astronaut or a smoke jumper,
A smoke jumper. That would be cool. Well, let's make the assumption that someone would like to be an NCIS agent, which I'm sure a lot of folks do. What advice would you give them? Is there a typical career path?
Since those silly TV shows showed up, everyone knows NCIS.
Yep.
When we do hiring, it's only for a class of 25 at a time, and they might hire 3 or 4 classes a year. They'll open the window on hiring for 72 hours, and the computer will certify resumes that meet the minimums and route them up. In 72 hours, they'll get 5,000 certified resumes that meet the criteria. I don't have any idea how many are rejected, but they shut them off after 72 hours, and then they sort through those to winnow down to 25 spots. It's highly, highly competitive. The U.S. government uses usajobs.gov as their advertising for positions. That's something that people need to go and look at. And you can put a resume on file, and you can set up search queries, and it will notify you if you put in job series 1811 special agent or investigator. If an announcement comes up, say from HUD or Treasury or NCIS or Secret Service, it will ping you and send you an email. Said these are coming open and you can apply. That's just, to get your application in the door. To actually be ready to be a special agent, that's the top of the heap in federal law enforcement. You have to have a bachelor's degree minimum and, no arrests and that sort of thing in your background, obviously. But that's the bare bones. The people we were seeing and interviewing generally have some extended experience, and they may have about half the people have master's degrees. Half of them had been in the military and had traveled overseas. About half of them spoke a language, and about half of them are already detectives or state police investigators or with other agencies. That's your competition.
Right.
So if you're 21 years old and coming out of college, say, I need a job and I'd like a good federal job, you just don't have a chance.
So what would give them, is there a particular college degree that would help them? What would give them the edge? When you're looking at 25 applicants out of 5,000 pre-approved applicants.
You can't, as a government agency, you can't discriminate and say, we'll only take this type of degree. So you could get your degree in physical education or basket weaving or theology or whatever. You have a bachelor's degree. That's your minimums. What I would tell young people is you're keeping an eye towards the future. I went to junior college, and then I went to university, and then I went to law school, and I was stepping and building, my academic resume. And then I tell people, look for the opportunities to be different, to something that an employer, in a law enforcement field would like to see. Are you a scuba diver? Can you fly an airplane? Do you have any advanced medical? I used to have guys come in that had gone through the EMT process. And I got to tell you, if I'm going to go through a door facing bad guys, I'd love to have a guy with medical training on my team who's right there,
Absolutely.
And also what evolved is we used to be real heavy on languages. We had, Arabic and Russian and Chinese, and we're still in those areas, but also computer is a language.
Right.
And it's now, that's just mandatory. You got to have good computer skills, working things like spreadsheets and obviously internet research. We had, kids come in and they're like, well, I have my own website. Like, how'd you do that? Oh, they teach us that in college. Well, for old people, that's just this shy of magic. Yeah.
Right. Well, what about some hackers to do all that impossible stuff you see in the TV show?
The actors? Yeah, we could hire a few of those.
Right. Might need a search warrant for that, I would assume. Well, great. Well, are there any current projects you're working on that you would like to share?
Sure. I continue to write. I've always written and published articles, and I've written 5 books, 4 of which are on concealed carry, and they're available via Amazon and Lulu and Barnes & Noble and Nook and Kindle, and they're under Mike Keleher, Keleher. I've got a book that I'm just in the beginning stages of on personal safety, about conducting yourself in the real world and being safe from stranger danger in the alley to at your home and on the internet. Things that we used to teach in anti-crime classes and stuff. I recently bumped into someone that really needed some assistance. And I had so much information, and it was like I'm a fire hose trying to tell her everything to do with, how to protect yourself. And it was too much. And I thought, if I slowed it down and put it into print, it would be easier to read. And I also write for a website called gunsavelife.com, and it's a pro-gun group. And they let me write whatever comes across my head and what I think about. And I do a lot of teaching about some safety things and firearms and deadly force issues. And so that's kind of fun.
It sounds like you're keeping very busy in your retired life here. and multiple books under your belt. That's really great. I'll have a link to all those on all of our future social media for this podcast. So thanks for doing that. As with most journeys, success largely depends on reliable transportation. And since I'm a huge car enthusiast, could you tell us what was your first car?
My first car was a 1974 Chevrolet Nova.
What color was it? I just picture like that green color.
It was a lime green, actually.
Hey!
Yeah. And I was in a class, an investigative class, and they were talking about memory. And people, they have those memories stuck in their head. They're still there, and you don't think of it. And then the class was, what was the license plate? I said, well, it's impossible. It's impossible. And he talked us through what it was like seeing that first car and driving it, and your friends would see you, and you spent so much time washing that car, and you drive down the road, and you look in the windows of businesses to see yourself. And I said, DK115. Those old memories are still in there.
Wow.
And you can still dredge them up if you and for, car guys, cars are such a huge part of your life.
So was that a 307 or a 350?
350.
Oh, good. Glad to hear. That's a heck of a first car.
Yeah. It was. It wasn't enough because it wasn't fancy enough for a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid. I wanted something bigger, but yeah, it was good for starts.
Now, what is your dream car?
I've always been a Corvette fanatic ever since I was a little kid, and I've owned a number of them. And I'm currently between Corvettes, working against my wife over the practicality of buying one going into the winter. And so I've had, I'm haggling between Mercedes Benz and BMWs right now to just go through the winter and then get a Corvette in the spring.
So what was your last Corvette, and what is your hope to be future Corvette?
My last one was a 96. And it was the Grand Sport, and it's an Admiral Blue Metallic. It's a very rich blue color with two stripes on the fender well.
Yeah, the red stripes. You had the black wheels, 5-spoke wheels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great car.
Yeah. And the next one up is I'm waiting for the 2014s to come down out of the $40,000 range. They did a revamp on the nose and the tail on the 2014s, and the 7s to the 13s were kind of a jelly bean rounded look, which I don't care for. But I also don't want to spend $45,000 on a used car at this moment.
Well, one great perk to some jobs is a company car. So if I had all the money in the world, I'd love to buy a really cool company car. And based on your position, this was tough because I thought, all right, investigator, hard nose, I went everywhere from Knight Rider, the black, to the Scooby-Doo mystery van, which I said, no, that won't work. Well, I ended up looking into the current NCIS TV show to see if they had any cool cars. And Gibbs, at one point on one of the episodes, he had a 1971 Dodge Challenger RT Hemi with the 426. So I said, you know what? You're retired. Let's get you something nicer. So I picked the 2019 Dodge Challenger Hellcat, but it's the red-eye version, which is new for 19. So that's got the Demon engine is inside the Hellcat with all the luxury appointments. So that's the car. If I had all the money in the world, I'd buy you as your company car.
That is an outstanding vehicle. My friend Ted Nugent has a Hellcat, but it's not the red-eye version, so it would be just that much better than the one Ted has.
Well, I'm thrilled to know that you're one of my few guests that knew what car I was actually talking about. Most of them are not car people. So.
Yeah. And if you got one more car moment, the very best government car I ever had was a Ford Mustang GT.
The 5-liter?
With a V8 5-liter, yeah. I had to get it out of Camp Pendleton. The guys over there weren't driving. I said, well, give it to me we were at 29 Palms. And they said, well, doesn't get good gas mileage. I was like, I don't care. The government's paying for the gas. Well, it's only, 2-door, don't care.
Right.
And we used that. That was a fun car, especially when you didn't own it.
Right. In college, I tried to buy one of the Florida Highway Patrol ex-patrol cars at auction for like $4,500. The little LX, had the white and the black, and a 5-liter stick, and they were beat to the ground, but I so wanted one so bad. I never bought it. Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. What's the best way our listeners can learn more about you or your books or whatever you want to share?
On Lulu.com are my books under Mike Keleher, also under Amazon. It's generally a little cheaper under Lulu. Unless you got Amazon Prime, then shipping is free. And they also have electronic or digital versions. And I don't have a website. My stuff on gunsafelife.com is available all the time via the internet.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for joining our call today.
Thank you very much, Greg. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Learn from Others, where we help others succeed by sharing success. Where will our next adventure take us? Subscribe to find out. If you know of someone who has a cool career story or occupation, contact Greg through Instagram at Greg Stanley LFO. That's GregStanley LFO. And we will see you soon as we learn from others together.